is joining us today, and a pleasure to see the many familiar faces and names. Our Federation Live virtual programs are among the many ways we've been reaching out to bring our Jewish community together over the past 3 months. At the same time, our Federation is also working to meet the rising critical needs of our people here in Israel and beyond. Through our annual campaign, our Federation's funding for more than 70 partner agencies enables us to respond immediately in times like these. With our Federation's vital support, our agencies on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis are able to continue, adapt, and increase their care for those most vulnerable in the face of these unprecedented challenges. Our Federation is in the final days of a 30-day community challenge, and we are still trying to raise the critical dollars necessary to meet the needs of our annual campaign. We need to make sure our seniors are safe and continue to live with dignity. We need to give those with special needs the opportunity to live a life full of joy and hope, even during these times. We need to ensure that our partners around the world in more than 70 countries can respond to crises like the COVID-19 pandemic that is affecting so many. We need to say to our brothers and sisters in Israel, we've not forgotten you. You're in our hearts, in our minds, and we will continue to give you our support. On June 19th, we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions if we do not raise the funds we need to keep our community strong. If you are in a position to help, we ask that you please go online today to make a gift to our annual campaign. Every donation of any size makes a difference, and there are so many people counting on us. Just think, if everyone who is on the call now or who joined later makes a donation of $18, think about how many people would benefit, because together we can do it. After our program, we'll email you some information to learn more about us and how to help, along with additional virtual opportunities to connect. But before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Your microphone is muted for the presentation. You can adjust the way your screen appears. If you would like to view the person who is speaking, please select Speaker View at the top of the Zoom screen. If you have questions, you will be able to ask them at the end of the presentation or email them. Now it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker. Justinian, or Justin Jampol, is the founder and current executive director of the Wende Museum of the Cold War, an art museum, historical archive, and educational institution in Culver City, California. Dr. Jampol attended graduate school at Oxford University, where he received a Master of Philosophy in Russian and East European Studies and a Doctor of Philosophy in Modern History. His work focuses on visual cultural studies and the connection between contemporary art and Cold War iconography. He is also the host and consulting producer of the Travel Channel series, Lost Secrets. His last name is a Western iteration of Jampol, a small shtetl in what is now Ukraine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Justin Jampol.
Hello, everybody. I'm still getting used to the whole Zoom presentation thing and miss having people here at the museum. I'm actually here at the museum right now. So I'm trying to imagine your faces and would be delighted to see you once again in real life, or IRL, as our cool young interns here say. I am delighted to be here with you virtually and sending all good vibes from here, coast to coast. I want to thank Felice and Erica for organizing this event. Thrilled to be here, and especially to Tammy Morgenstern. If you're listening in, she's the one who I have to thank for all this coming together. We now know you bring people together in the physical world as well as the virtual one. I also want to give a shout out to Larry Platt, who I'll mention again later, who's joining us, and our angel from LA, Gloria Kaufman, if she's listening in. It's a special pleasure to be here with you today for a few reasons, especially because it's one of those cases in which, as you've heard, my family biography overlaps with this particular topic. The Jampols, it was first Jampolski, come from that part of the world that's affected by the story I'm going to talk about today. It's doubly meaningful because my grandfather, Richard Jampol, was a longtime member of the board of the Federation in Los Angeles. So there are multiple personal connections here. And before I dive in, I do want to say that this is a huge topic, and I've been given 30 minutes in order to cover something that will, could take 30 years. And in fact, it did happen. Basically, the culminating event happened about 30 years ago, around the same time of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union. So as time goes by, the past is becoming history. And in fact, that is very much the mission of the Wende. It is a Los Angeles-based nonprofit organization that is dedicated to acquiring, preserving, and expanding access to cultural and political objects, personal history, and documentary materials of Cold War Eastern Europe. And we're going to be flipping through some of the pictures, as you can see. The museum was established in 2002, and from the very beginning, we've worked to promote interdisciplinary research about this compelling period and to uncover and highlight its stories. So this means that these stories are not necessarily well known by American audiences. And I often feel like we're as much of an oral history library as we are a museum, because we collect stories as much as we collect objects. And storytelling has been at the core of our approach and our mission from the very beginning. I should say, kind of full disclosure, I'm a historian who's terrible with names, dates, and places, which is a terrible thing for a museum, for a historian. But I am interested in people, in the faces behind the events, and in bringing those to life. And I think that is the spirit of this place. The Wende's collections began in 1945, just after World War II, and go all the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It is an era of extraordinary transformation. And in fact, the name of the museum, Wende, means change in German. And I'm convinced it must have some Yiddish roots, because my great-grandmother, who only spoke Yiddish and Russian, used the word to mean the wind, the Wende. It's a term that has been used to describe the heady days of change around the time of the Berlin Wall and its fall, and the implicit question mark of what comes next. It also suggests, I think, unfinished business. We continue to be in a time in which this past is not yet history, and it's our job to save it before it's gone. So with that, and describing a little bit about what the Wende Museum does and its mission, I want to segue into the project that got us started on the topic of Soviet Jewry. About 5 years ago, we approached Cal Humanities, which is a grants organization within the state. And we said, look, we want to connect the here and the there and the then and the now, and help find an episode in the past that will help us to guide us in our present. And we were awarded this grant in order to pursue, understand, and present a documentary on the Soviet Jewish immigrant experience in Los Angeles. That was a film titled From Red State to Golden State. And you can see here by the little fun fact here, that there is a robust community not far away from here, where we are in Culver City, where there is still a concentrated Soviet Jewish community. So it's a community I'm going to talk about in just a minute. These emigres and their American-born children share personal stories of persecution in the Soviet Union and of the challenges of adapting to life in the US. and how they identify with their cultural heritage. We also chose this story because, well, it's local, and because also on the international stage, you can't talk about the Cold War and the Soviet Union without talking about the Soviet Jewish experience and the Soviet Jewry movement, which was one of the most important movements of this era. So to briefly summarize, before I dive in, the Soviet Jewry movement can broadly be defined as the internal and global response to the plight of the Soviet Jewish people, who faced rampant anti-Semitism, religious persecution, and were denied the right to emigrate, to flee under the Soviet regime. It was a grassroots movement that became a global and multifaceted protest. And it might be impossible to describe life in the Soviet Union without underscoring the presence of fear and of pervasive economic hardship. But what often goes unsaid is that while life for the general public was, of course, in many ways tarnished by oppression, and that was could be ascribed to the entire population, but life for the Jewish community in the Soviet Union was utterly defined by restriction, repression. So this sets the stage and provides the context for talking a little bit about what life in the Soviet Union was like for Jews. The state atheism of the USSR went beyond religion for Jews. It really affected cultural expression of familial rituals. It impacted the ability to not only practice Judaism, but to practice the cultural customs that had been passed on from generation to generation. And this was not only in abstract terms, but in real practical and direct ways in which anti-Semitism was played out in the daily lives of Jewish people in the Soviet Union. They had to identify themselves as Jewish on job applications. They were mandated to list their ethnicity as Jewish on their passports rather than as Russians. So, it would be impossible to start going into what led to the pervasive anti-Semitism in the USSR. And, there are so many other PhDs and specialists who dive into this topic and know far more about it than I do. But certainly one could say that in the realm and the context of the USSR, anti-Semitism was used as a form of control, of resisting revolution by creating and atomizing groups and communities of people from one another. And when it came time that this bubbling movement to leave the USSR, this yearning for freedom, tens of thousands who applied the legal channels to be able to leave, because technically and officially you were allowed to leave the Soviet Union. It was, it was written in the Constitution that it was a choice. Well, of course, we all know now and then very quickly that it was one thing to apply for an exit visa, and it was another one to be refused. And this is just a joke that was often told, because once the movement to leave gained steam and there was word out on the streets that Soviet Jews were trying to leave, there was a joke that went around that implied that there were a lot more people than just the Jews who wanted to get out. So this is also very much situated in the context of who would become known as the refuseniks. And the refuseniks were those who were in a state of refusal because of their applications and their applications that were denied. So they were treated as enemies of the state. Many lost their jobs, they were demoted, lost their homes, they were followed and bullied by the secret police. And they continued to resist by covertly leading Jewish lives and overtly challenging the government and sharing their story, which eventually spread to the West. And so by the late 1960s, news reached the free world, quote unquote, that it became such a powerful issue that it was taken up by American Jewish communities across the country and the continent, including university students, certainly those here in LA at places like UCLA, which was a hotbed of student activism on behalf of Soviet Jews. There was a Council of Soviet Jewry that was formed, as well as a California Council of Soviet Jews. Trips to the Soviet Union were formed. I mean, this was something that was an organized attempt to give people a firsthand experience of going to the Soviet Union to talk to Soviet Jews. So there were organizations like the Federation, in fact, that helped to organize these trips. And they facilitated them by giving them the names of the people to visit, contextual information about their backgrounds, maybe gifts to bring from here to there. And they kind of did it on a matching basis. And they were often accompanied by influential non-Jews who became an integral part of the advocacy groups that then cultivated and supported the Refusnik movement. And this matchmaking was extraordinarily impactful. And many people talk about the transformative effect that it had on them. Our friend here, Larry Platt, who is a friend of mine and a friend of the museum's, and who I think is on this call today, talks about the way in which his trip to the Soviet Union really was a transformative trip for him in terms of awareness, and also, of course, to put a human face on the struggle. I mean, it's one thing to think about this conceptually, that there are people that want to leave and want to come here. It's another one to have the experience of sitting down with them, of having a Shabbat dinner together, and understanding the importance of this to those people who people like Larry met. And I've heard that from so many people, that this was an extraordinarily important part of the grassroots groundswell for support for the Refusniks. There really was an exodus that was in motion. The problem is there were a lot of political issues along the way, not only, of course, internally within the USSR and not wanting Soviet Jews to leave, but also within the United States. So there was Jackson-Vanik Amendment in 1974 that put enormous pressure on the Soviet Union in terms of trade, and said, look, if you want to have the same stake in trade as you could have, we need to make letting Soviet Jewry go as part of the deal. And very much it was part of this Cold War effort and approach that they wanted to avoid antagonizing the Soviet Union. So they tried to contextualize it in terms of repatriation, of going back to Israel, even though, of course, many people then went on and came to places like the United States. But this was really the policy and the global pressure that began, that led to this extraordinary moment in the Soviet Union beginning to back down and giving limited exit visas. And already by the late 1970s, 270,000 Jews left the Soviet Union for other places in the world. And now many of them ended up going to Israel, but a good high proportion of them came here to the United States. But it was still difficult to leave. I mean, even though those seemed like extraordinarily large numbers, you had to fulfill certain things in order to get out. And a good example of that was you needed a sponsor. So part of the role of American Jewish organizations was to be the sponsor for Soviet Jews who wanted to emigrate and come here. Jewish Federation once again, was one of those organizations that did that. Still had to wait years for permission. They had to get approval from their jobs to leave. And in one of the most sort of insidious and sort of provocative moves the Soviets did was to make Soviet Jewish families pay for all the schooling that they had received in order to leave. They had to pay back the country with the idea that they got this great free education, so then had to pay it back. And there were also extremely limited rules on what you could bring with you. So in our movie, From Red State to Golden State, we talk about the artist who's forced to leave her canvases behind, or you're allowed one piece of gold, but it usually meant that people had to melt down the jewelry that they had to try to get it through, including wedding bands and things like that. So it was an extraordinarily difficult, challenging, and quite sort of depressing experience of having to of trying to leave. And this was something that then, because of these exchanges, because of the international press, it started to increase. There was so much more awareness about it, and it became harder and harder for the Soviets to stop it. I mean, a great example of this. On December 6th of 1987, there was Freedom Sunday at the mall in Washington, D.C., where 250,000 people, 250,000 people, gathered together at the mall to protest on behalf of Soviet Jews. And this is the time of Gorbachev, and this is when it was kind of already now towards the end. But this was just kind of the final stake. I mean, 250,000 people was impossible to ignore. 250,000 people on the mall was the same number of people that were on the mall for the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King. So this represented the final turning point in the process, whereby so many people had left up until that point and continued to leave in those last few years, again, before the fall of the Soviet Union, and it was all over by 1991. It was the largest movement of human beings in the latter half of the 20th century, which I find to be extraordinary. So in looking at what life was like in the US, I think in many ways it's an intersection of the story of an immigrant experience, as so many have coming to this country, overlaid with the story of Jewish identity and recapturing what was lost. Russian Jews have, when they came, had little notion or even positive memories of Jewishness, even if they had some sort of awareness of it. It was something that was seen as needing to be hidden. And of course, there was a real risk in practicing Jewish cultures, customs, and rituals. So part of what the experience was like when Soviet Jews came to the United States was the recovery of lost traditions and a new relationship with Judaism, when they were allowed to determine for themselves the role that religion and ethnic identity would play in their lives. And of course, over generations, this then plays out where now many of them are in the second, third generations. And when there's some choose to never go back and reclaim their heritage, but many of them now are and are asking questions, which is why our Historical Witness Project has been the sort of backbone of this oral histories in capturing and preserving these stories. So to summarize all this, what began as a grassroots movement across the Soviet Union and the United States, and by the way, other Western countries as well, eventually grew into a geopolitical conflict between East and West. It was activism on a global scale, and it ultimately is one that begins and ends with people who, in the face of oppression, spoke out and left everything behind in the search for freedom, and for not only political freedom, but the freedom to practice one's own religion and to explore one's own cultural identity, and ultimately to uncover one's own hidden stories. So that brings us to the upcoming exhibition that we have coming up in the museum, originally scheduled for this fall, but I mean, with everything going on in the world, who knows, but it's definitely going to happen. And we're very excited about it because it is a collaboration between Bill Aaron and Yevgeny Fix, both brilliant artists. And, you know, I spoke a lot about oral histories and their importance. But I think there's another thing to mention here, and it's really critical for not only for our exhibition, but to be aware of for the movement, because there are no movements without people, but there is also no movement without symbols and imagery. And Bill Aaron, who's the Dean of American Jewish Photographers, visited the cities of Leningrad, Minsk, Moscow, and in each city he photographed the synagogues, which served as common ground for Soviet Jews who are trying to hold on to their religious heritage. And his photos provided the strong sense of narrative. They provided an opportunity for people not only to read about Soviet Jews, but to see them, to have powerful images. And no matter how good there is a description or text, there's nothing like seeing the imagery, and which then became very, very powerful symbols, which were used in promotional materials. You would see these images in the newspaper, on signage, in fact, at protests. So these were incredibly important photos that we'll be showing in the exhibit. But having multiple perspectives is very important for us. So not only do we have Bill Aaron's photographs, we also have the artwork of Yevgeny Fix, who is a Soviet Jewish artist, who is going to be presenting works and images and artifacts from Birobidzhan, which is the Soviet autonomous region in the Soviet Union. Yevgeny Fix is a conceptual artist, and his work is really inspired by the collapse of the Soviet bloc, and he re-examines the Soviet experience and connects it with the theme of space. And what's really interesting about this, at first you think, okay, these are two very sort of seemingly unconnected themes, but in fact he draws them together in such a clever and interesting way, and explores the way that despite anti-Semitic policies to restrict Soviet Jews' access to prestigious universities after World War II, Soviet Jews continued to thrive in the field of science and engineering, including in the Soviet space program, which was an area where the Soviet Jewish community could still have the opportunity to thrive. But even then, there were hurdles and challenges. State-led anti-Semitism led to the cancellation of several scheduled space explorations, particularly of Soviet cosmonaut Boris Volynov, who was a close associate of Yuri Gagarin, because of his Jewish background. There were letters sent by quote unquote concerned citizens to the Soviet authorities who demanded that they not send a Jew into space. So it was only till 1969 and 1976 when Volynov was able to go into space, which he finally did. And at the same time, it's interesting, there was an exodus from the USSR. The project speculates that the Soviet cosmos became the epitome of the Soviet homeland for Soviet Jews, and therefore defines the Soviet Jewish narrative as one longing for scientific progress as a homeland that embraces them. So now I want to sort of try to connect all the dots here. I left you with a lot of different breadcrumbs here along the way, and I hope to sort of string these together so we can all lead to a place that I think is ultimately all interconnected, because our goal at the Wende is to convey the complexity and significance of the Soviet Union and the Cold War in the hopes that people will actively engage with history and forge their own relationships to the past. It's our belief that by revealing personal testimonies and creating space for responses to the past in terms of our oral histories, what we do on the website, and of course our exhibition like I just described, we aim to expose the lived experience beneath geopolitical struggles and tell the stories that have gone untold and to create a community in the process. So the story of Soviet Jewry fits squarely within that mission, that mandate. In putting a spotlight on the Soviet Jewish experience, as the exhibition will do, as the Wende does, it will help to shine a light on the movement and on the refuseniks. It will build on the film that was produced, the materials that have already been collected, and a robust historical witness project sponsored by a member of our board, Fiona Shalom and Joel Aronowitz, has gone on for the past 3 years, and all together will create what we're calling the Soviet Jewry Initiative. And this initiative will coincide with a fully funded multi-year digitization plan to scan all the materials and make them open and accessible online and for free. So the problem is with a lot of these extraordinary archives that exist around the world is the lack of access. And in this day and age and what we're experiencing right now, I mean, we are all physically prevented from going places. So we realize more than ever how important online access and digitization is. And finally, for the most exciting news of all, we will soon break ground on the new Gloria Kaufman Creative Community Center on the campus of the Wende. And it is a vision of the philanthropist and artist Gloria Kaufman that will be the headquarters and the repository for select archives, including the Soviet Jewry archive, along with the Gloria Kaufman archive. The center will have a theater for lectures and workshops and classrooms for students to grow and to thrive, as well as dance and music that are going to be made available free of charge to everyone. So this is a totally new visionary concept. You are among the first to see these renderings. Of course, Gloria has seen them. Tammy Morgenstern, who's been my trusted architectural advisor all along the way, in conjunction with Ox Architecture, the architecture firm that is behind this. And Gloria, if you're listening, you are magic, you are magical, and I'm so excited to break ground on this extraordinary project. So in conclusion, and it's probably the most important question of all, in talking about preserving the stories of Soviet Jewry, why does this all matter? So usually historians like me have to do intellectual gymnastics to try and connect the past to the present. We use abstract tropes like the one about history repeating itself, for example. And in this particular case, I literally can't think of any recent historical episode that has bound up in it nearly all of the issues of this moment. The experience of Soviet Jewry is a story of struggle against authority, against repression, against isolation, against being separate from others. And of course, it's a story about emigration and of new opportunities to the United States and elsewhere. I guess you could say that the moral of the story is that what we're going through right now in the world is not new. And I, for one, take great comfort in reflecting back to what my family went through, what so many families went through to get here, and what the refuseniks had to deal with. It doesn't solve all of our problems. It's not a cure-all to be aware of our past, but it does give us something invaluable: perspective. And ultimately, that's one of the most important jobs of a historian, to find the humanity that connects us all and roots our own personal, individual experiences in the experiences of others. So that's my talk, everyone. And I will play my virtual clapping just to make myself feel better on my own computer. I'm imagining raving applause. I'm totally kidding. No, but it was a great pleasure. And I know we're going to do a Q&A, so look forward to any of the questions that you might have. She's muted.
Felice.
Reiterate our thanks to, I think that you probably didn't hear me. I wanted to, thank you, Justin, for such a fabulous program. We are going to do Q&A, but I did want to reiterate, my thanks and appreciation to Tammy Morgenstern, who is such a resource and a great connector, and thank you. And I also want to thank both Gloria and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, but is the artist Feeks on the call with us today?
Oh, I think he could be. Let me look it up. Oh, he is.
He is. So I just wanted to say wow and thank you. That's really fabulous. You know, really an honor to have him as well. For those of you who want to ask questions, you can hover your over the participants. It'll say raise hand and we can ask the question. Anyone have questions, I and Erica will help call on you. So, and I'm actually going to start with a question and that someone had actually already sent us. And the first one is, why didn't the Soviet regime allow Jews to emigrate?
Well, I think that's why this is such a Cold War story, in that, you know, you can't see these things in isolation. This was a time of enormous political tension between East and West. And part of what the competition was who has the better place to live, who has the more moral, who has the more ethical land, and who can claim superiority. And to have a whole group of a community saying, oh, I want to leave, you know, and want to get out of there was a real blow to that claim. So I think in light of the Cold War, it has to be seen as, I mean, it was an embarrassment to the Soviets. And then that's why the pressure from the American Jewish community was so critical, because they made the consequences of not doing anything so much worse that they finally relented.
Great. Another question that someone had sent us early was, how does the Wende acquire artifacts related to Soviet Jewry and the Soviet Jewry movement?
Great question. A lot of our artifacts come from viewers just like you. No, I mean, you know, I talk about this a lot and proselytize what the museum does. And part of what the impact is that because so few organizations are doing this, I mean, I would like to think it's also because we're magnificent and people love us, but so few do it that if that's a history that has touched them personally, if they have family albums, if they have materials, they often will come to us. So we've been growing our collections usually in this way by people who themselves or their family have had this experience and want to ensure that the memory is preserved by giving it to the museum.
Which is very nice for the families and so important. We all should always realize that. I want to call on now Michelle Bleicher, I believe, has a question for you. And Michelle, will unmute you and you can ask.
Thank you. First of all, let me say, Justin, I greatly appreciate, I found your talk fascinating. I hope I'm not off topic when I ask you, what is it like being a Jew living in the USSR today? And what about us as tourists when the world opens up again? Is this, I mean, I've been a couple of, you know, places where I know Jews were not treated well, but is the Soviet area something that we should consider? So I'm concerned about today, and I hope I'm not off topic.
I mean, not at all. And I mean, I think sometimes it's one of those things, and why I think that question is so important is, I think we as humans, and certainly even as historians, we like these bookend dates, you know. The Cold War was 1945 to 1991, and then it kind of, the book closes. But in fact, everything we're experiencing in the world today, and I know it sounds overly simplistic, but is a direct result of what happened before. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, to your point, anti-Semitism didn't just poof, go away. It just changed, it morphed. They didn't have the same kind of opportunity for control to limit people's movements. But certainly anti-Semitism still exists. It is alive and well in Russia, and you know, it doesn't take a lot to, you know, we're all reading the news these days. Anything that revolves Russia and Putin, I mean, mostly authoritarian regimes tend to instrumentalize history. In other words, they need to look for claims to their legitimacy. And unfortunately, anti-Semitism is one of those historic claims that authoritarian leaders tend to use. And so, yeah, I mean, it's changed. It's not sort of as isolating and isolated and isolating as it was, but still alive and well, unfortunately.
Thank you. I don't believe I see any other questions. And Michelle, I want to say thank you for that question, because anti-Semitism sadly is alive and well. And so everyone who's on the call knows it is something that our federation works with here and overseas to try and help those in need and those who want to leave their countries. We're always there through our partner agencies. I want to thank everyone who was on the call today. I want to thank Justin particularly for joining us on the call today. His program was so informative and interesting, so thank you. Please join us on Monday, June 29th for Renee Sylvan. He will be discussing the life and history of Addison Meisner. Look for your email with additional meaningful ways to connect with our Federation and our Jewish community during these unprecedented times. And please, if you can make a gift to our annual campaign, it really will make a difference to those who need us. Together with our caring community, we thrive. Please stay safe and be well and stay healthy. And thank you.